Which is better, highway driving or in the city? And we'll talk about that on this segment of the Get Geezer. Well, I'm in a setting that seems to be more innate to me since I've been doing segments of the Get Geezer for the past year or so, probably more than the last year and a half. And that's where I'm driving, I'm processing 6 or 7 different thoughts, and then I'm also doing a Get Geezer segment. And so this one is, I'm gonna say that it's directly and somewhat indirectly a reply to a comment that was made on a recent Get Geezer. Well, it was a recent comment that I noticed on a Get Geezer segment. And the commenter says, well, all those miles just means more maintenance costs and there's more costs with the upkeep of a van. And I really shouldn't have to be talking about this, because if someone really were to do their homework on this, there's more material, there's more data that says how driving the road is much easier on a vehicle than driving in city. And so let's put it into context as in the context of owning and operating of a Sprinter / cargo van. Now, over the last year and a half, I've put well over 100,000 miles in this van on my own. And I can tell you that under most driving conditions for me, I'm going to get about 20 miles to a gallon. And I may eke up to about 21 miles to a gallon on the road, depending on how much I've got in the van and what type of road that I'm driving. What I mean by that is, I know just from experience, there's certain stretches of road where I get better gas mileage than other stretches of road. And one stretch of road that I know that I'm not going to get as good gas mileage is if I'm dealing with hills. If I'm going up in an upgrade, if I'm going up a grade, mountain grade, like in South Carolina, for example, if I were to drive to the Asheville, North Carolina area, there's 2 ways that I know to go. One is through Greenville, which is kind of a bypass, but you're still going through an upward grade. And the other is directly through taking I-26, where I believe that the hill grade is like 6 or 7%. And that's going to Asheville. And so I should not expect, especially if I'm carrying some weight, but even if I'm not, I should not expect to get the same gas mileage as I would if I were on more of a flatter terrain or a more favorable terrain. And a good example is that if I'm driving I-95 going towards Florida, I tend to get real good gas mileage. If I drive I-20 going to Atlanta, I tend to get good gas mileage. It's relatively flat. Some hills, but relatively flat. They're both similar. But another example is when the couple of times I completed Federal Express routes. These are in 2023 in my van. Now, you want to talk wear and tear. That's wear and tear on a vehicle. And let's say you do that on a consistent basis. Let's say you do that 3-4 times a week. You're going to cause more wear and tear on your vehicle doing that than you are driving on the road. What you got to understand is that, for example, with Federal Express, I did, in my last time around doing Federal Express, I did on average 75, 80 stops and in upwards of 100 stops. And you're starting, stopping, just on starting and stopping alone at stop signs, stop lights, at the stops, you're your braking. That's wear and tear. That's how you run down your brakes. Not so much the tires, but brakes. You're gonna do a little work on the transmission, depending on how you drive. If you drive like a bat out of hell, where you're gunning and then you're stopping hard, that's wear and tear. But I'm also gonna say this along those lines. I rarely have heard W-2s complain about when they have to commute to a job situation. And I can think back to when I did what was a hybrid W-2 situation. Well, actually, an actual W-2 situation. I can give you two of them as an insurance agent almost 10 years ago. For most of 2015, I made a 30 to 40 minute commute from where I lived in the northwest part of Columbia over into Lexington County. But I dealt with stopping, starting, and all that. And not once did I ever complain about going to that insurance agency. My second one, a few months later after that one ended, I commuted for a few months to Orangeburg, from Columbia to Orangeburg, South Carolina. Some of it was highway, but then some of it was in the city in Orangeburg. And then when I got back to Columbia, in the afternoons, it was always a starting stopping because of traffic. That was more wear and tear on my Maxima than if I were to have just driven from Columbia to Charleston doing a lift run. And that's another example. Rideshare. If you're not doing a long run, you're starting, stopping. If you're able to have somewhat of a busy day, and let's say you do 2 to 3 rides an hour, which is conceivable. Some say more. But you're doing that starting, stopping in the city. That's wear and tear. The thing that really gets me when it comes to folk who are always talking about wear and tear on a vehicle when it comes to gig work. Well, I ain't got to do that. I'm not going to put all that wear and tear on my vehicle and kill my and all that depreciation. Here's the thing. When you were a W-2, did you ever complain about commuting to your job? Did you ever? Or did you dutifully go to your job every single day, regardless of however much distance that you had to drive? I'm curious to know. I've given you an example of I've given you 2 examples of my doing basically W-2 work as an insurance agent and how I commuted. And that doesn't include when I was doing a lot of footwork looking for business as an insurance agent, where I was starting, stopping, and all that, because that's wear and tear on the engine as well. So when you're on the road, statistically speaking, you're supposed to be getting better gas mileage. You're not working the transmission as hard unless you're driving 90, 95 miles an hour. You're taking heavy loads that are heavier than what you really should. If you know your weight capacity of your vehicle, you're not pushing it, and then you're not driving up mountains. You're not gonna work your van as hard. There are 2 things that I will give you when it comes to driving road. Depending on how much you're carrying, and of course miles, over time, you're gonna wear your tires. That's a given. The other thing is that eventually you will wear brakes. Well, brakes are gonna, if you're just doing, if 90% of your driving is road, unless you're really riding those brakes, you're not gonna wear them down as fast. The transmissions are not gonna work as hard. Personally speaking, over 85% of the loads that I do are less than 1,000 pounds. That's like 3 or 4 people, including myself. That's like 3 or 4 people in my van. That's basically normal driving conditions. So what I'm sharing is probably more opinion, but if you do enough searching on the internet, just Google that information, you'll find more information that says highway is better than driving. It's much easier maintenance. I mean, and the other thing I'll give you too is that if you're going to do miles, if you're going to put in the miles, you're going to have to change your oil in a much faster interval, especially if you do like I do, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 miles is typically when I change my oil. Sometimes it gets around 7,000 miles, and I'm very uncomfortable with that, because what happens is that regardless of what they tell you with that oil that you're putting in, it says, oh, it's 10,000 mile oil or 15,000 mile oil. Eventually, that oil is going to cause sludge in your engine. And that sludge is not something that you can, clean out of your engine as well as what you think. So you want to change your oil at a fairly frequent interval, and that's good for your engine over the long haul. If you put some like for me, I put synthetic oil treatment because I use full synthetic oil. That's an extra $8 to $10, but it's well worth it. So that's all I have to share on this particular segment of the Get Geezer. If you like the content that's been provided in this segment or in any other segment, hit that subscribe button. Give my content a thumbs up. Share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I'm Inwood Lane. As always, may your grind and may your hustle continue.